Imagine a society where only the wisest individuals have the right to govern. No elections swayed by charisma, no empty promises from opportunistic politicians, no manipulation of public sentiment, just leadership based purely on intellectual and moral excellence. This is the essence of Sophocracy, the rule of the wise, a concept deeply embedded in Plato's political philosophy. To him, democracy was not the ideal form of government, but rather a system doomed to failure, where the uninformed majority would inevitably make poor choices, leading to instability and corruption. In contrast, he envisioned a world where leadership was reserved for those who had undergone rigorous intellectual training, individuals who had mastered the art of governance, through reason, virtue, and philosophical wisdom. But could such a system truly work in practice? And if only the wise are allowed to rule, who determines what wisdom truly is? These questions lie at the heart of one of the most controversial debates in political thought. Plato's vision of Sophocracy is best articulated in the Republic, where he introduces the idea of the Philosopher-King, the ultimate ruler, chosen not by birthright, wealth, or popular vote, but by sheer intellectual and moral superiority. Just as a ship should be navigated by a skilled captain rather than a clueless crew, a nation, Plato argued, should be led by those who genuinely understand governance. To ensure this, future rulers would undergo a lifetime of philosophical and ethical education, free from the distractions of personal ambition or material wealth. Their minds would be trained to perceive the truth beyond appearances, to act in the best interest of the people, and to resist the temptations of power. Yet, even in this seemingly utopian vision, a dilemma emerges. How can wisdom be objectively measured? And in attempting to create a perfect ruling class, wouldn't society risk replacing democracy's instability with an intellectual aristocracy? Plato's disdain for democracy was not merely theoretical, it was deeply personal. He had witnessed firsthand the downfall of Athenian democracy, culminating in the trial and execution of his mentor Socrates, condemned by the very system that claimed to uphold justice. For Plato, this was irrefutable proof that democracy allowed ignorance to masquerade as wisdom, empowering those who could manipulate public opinion rather than those who truly understood the needs of the state. In his eyes, democracies were breeding grounds for demagogues, politicians skilled in telling people what they wanted to hear rather than what they needed to hear. The result, he believed, was inevitable: corruption, social decay, and ultimately the rise of tyranny. Democracy, for all its promises of equality and freedom, was merely a stepping stone toward its own destruction. But does that mean that wisdom alone guarantees effective leadership? History has shown that intelligence, no matter how profound, does not always translate into sound governance. Some of the most brilliant minds have also been the most disastrous rulers, blinded by arrogance or disconnected from the struggles of ordinary citizens. The comparison between Sophocracy and democracy forces us to confront an uncomfortable question. Should leadership be a privilege earned through intellect or a right granted to all? Plato's critique of democracy highlights undeniable flaws: the dangers of mob rule, the ease with which public opinion can be manipulated, and the tendency for emotion to override reason in decision-making. However, his proposed alternative is equally problematic. If only the wise are fit to govern, who decides who qualifies as wise? And wouldn't this system inevitably create an elite ruling class, detached from the very people they are meant to serve? The challenge of governance has always been finding the right balance between knowledge and representation, expertise and accountability. As we move further into an age of information overload, political polarization, and technological influence over decision-making, Plato's questions remain as pressing as ever. Can wisdom and democracy coexist? Or is the rule of the wise just another form of authoritarianism disguised as enlightenment? Plato's Allegory of the Ship, one of the most powerful metaphors in his Republic, offers a searing critique of democracy by illustrating how the masses, driven by ignorance, are ill-equipped to govern themselves. In the allegory, a ship represents the state, and the captain is the ruler. However, the ship is adrift, its crew untrained, disorderly, and disinterested in the ship's true purpose. Instead, they are preoccupied with their own personal gain. and want to take control of the ship, even though they lack the knowledge and skill required to navigate it properly. The allegory highlights a crucial point. Just as the crew of a ship should be composed of skilled sailors, the leaders of a state should possess the knowledge and wisdom necessary to guide the nation. Plato believed that in a democracy, the citizens, represented by the untrained, self-interested crew, would vote for leaders who only appealed to their immediate desires, rather than electing those who understood the long-term interests of the state. The allegory reveals a central flaw in Plato's thinking about democracy, the assumption that people will always act out of ignorance and self-interest. By depicting the masses as chaotic and uninformed, Plato fails to fully appreciate the capacity of individuals to make informed decisions, especially when equipped with the proper education and resources. It's true that the democratic process can sometimes be manipulated by populist rhetoric, where leaders promise quick fixes without addressing deeper societal issues. However, it is also a system that allows for checks and balances, dissent, and public debate, crucial elements that can counterbalance the potential dangers of uninformed decision-making. In modern democracies, citizens have access to vast amounts of information and are not limited to just the voices of demagogues or charismatic leaders. The ship, therefore, may not be as adrift as Plato suggests. It may be navigating through choppy waters, but with a far more complex understanding of the issues at hand. Plato's criticism of democracy is rooted in his belief that the majority of people are simply not qualified to make important decisions. He viewed the people as being like the crew of a ship, lacking expertise, swayed by emotions, and easily manipulated by persuasive leaders. He argued that democracies inevitably give rise to demagogues, leaders who know how to exploit public fear and manipulate the masses with promises they cannot fulfill. This danger is particularly evident in times of crisis, when people are more likely to place their trust in charismatic figures who promise stability and order. For Plato, the problem was not just that the masses lacked knowledge, but that they lacked the ability to recognize their own ignorance. This, he believed, was the fatal flaw of democracy. It gave power to those who could most convincingly appeal to emotions rather than reason. This fear of the democratic masses led Plato to propose the idea of philosopher-kings, wise, rational rulers who would be above the petty concerns of the people and focused solely on the common good. However, Plato's vision of the ship's crew is a somewhat bleak and one-sided portrayal of democracy. Modern democracies, though imperfect, offer mechanisms for education, accountability, and public participation that allow for more informed choices. While Plato's allegory highlights the dangers of democracy falling prey to manipulation, it also overlooks the potential for growth and evolution within democratic systems. Citizens today are more informed and involved than ever before, and the democratic process is increasingly responsive to the needs of diverse groups. While demagogues certainly exist, democracy's openness and adaptability can act as a safeguard, preventing any one individual or group from holding unchecked power. The allegory of the ship, while valuable in its warning about the dangers of populism, does not fully account for the ways in which democracy can self-correct and evolve. At the heart of Plato's allegory is the idea that the wise and knowledgeable should guide the state, but it raises critical questions about the nature of wisdom and knowledge. Who determines what is wise? And how can a society ensure that those in power remain truly dedicated to the public good rather than becoming corrupt or disconnected from the people they are meant to serve? In the context of today's global political systems, the allegory of the ship remains relevant, especially when considering the rise of populism and the erosion of trust in traditional institutions. As we reflect on Plato's warning about democracy, we must ask ourselves, can we trust the people to make the right decisions? Or should we place our faith in a select group of intellectual elites? The challenge of balancing democratic values with the need for expertise is as urgent today as it was in ancient Athens, and Plato's allegory serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers that come with both extremes. The figure of the philosopher-king is at the heart of Plato's vision of an ideal state. For Plato, the philosopher-king is not just any ruler, but an individual who has spent a lifetime cultivating wisdom, knowledge, and moral integrity. In his view, the best rulers are those who have dedicated themselves to the pursuit of truth, understanding, and justice. A philosopher-king, by virtue of their philosophical education, would be able to see beyond personal desires, wealth, or political power, and would govern solely for the well-being of the people. These rulers would be selected based on their intellectual abilities and virtues, having undergone rigorous training that prepared them to lead with reason and fairness. This model stands in stark contrast to democratic systems where rulers are often chosen based on popularity or personal appeal rather than competence or wisdom. Plato believed that only those who had mastered the philosophical understanding of what is truly good could be trusted to rule justly. The idea of the philosopher-king raises an essential question. What does it take to be truly wise, and who determines? Who is fit to govern? In Plato's view, wisdom is not merely about intellectual knowledge, but about having the moral integrity to use that knowledge for the public good. The philosopher-king, in his ideal form, is both a master of reason and an embodiment of virtue. Plato emphasized the importance of education in shaping these leaders. They would spend their youth studying mathematics, philosophy, and the sciences, progressively refining their minds and honing their moral sensibilities. Only after this long period of intellectual and ethical development would they be deemed capable of ruling the state. However, this idealized notion of the philosopher-king presents several problems. Who, in practice, determines who is truly wise? And is it possible to create a system of governance that truly identifies the wisest individuals without falling into the trap of elitism or corruption? Despite its seemingly utopian nature, Plato's vision of the philosopher-king has been both admired and criticized throughout history. Some have seen it as an attempt to establish a form of governance that elevates wisdom over popularity, offering a potential alternative to the chaos and volatility of democratic rule. Others, however, have pointed out the dangers inherent in this system. In a world where power is concentrated in the hands of a select few, there is always the risk of those in power becoming disconnected from the people they are meant to serve. Furthermore, the philosopher-king concept assumes that those in power will always act with benevolence and that their wisdom will never be corrupted by greed or personal ambition. This assumption is perhaps the most significant flaw in Plato's theory. Even the most virtuous leaders are still human, capable of mistakes, biases, and moral failings. History is filled with examples of individuals who, despite their intellectual prowess, have been deeply flawed as leaders. Moreover, the philosopher-king concept risks creating a form of intellectual elitism, where governance is restricted to a select few who are deemed wise enough to rule. This presents a significant challenge. How do we define wisdom, and who gets to decide? In Plato's ideal society, the wise rulers would be entrusted with absolute power, yet such a concentration of authority raises important concerns. Could a system that places all decision-making power in the hands of an intellectual elite ever be truly democratic? Would it be fair to exclude large segments of the population from political participation on the grounds that they are not wise enough to contribute? The philosopher-king may embody Plato's highest ideals of wisdom and justice, but it remains unclear whether such a system could function in a way that is just and fair to all. Plato's philosopher-king has long been an ideal that has influenced not only political philosophers, but also political leaders who seek to justify their own authority through claims of superior wisdom or intellect. Yet while the philosopher-king may serve as a model for how rulers should ideally act, guided by wisdom, reason, and a genuine concern for the welfare of the state, its practical application in the real world remains questionable. In modern politics, we see the dangers of elevating experts to positions of power, particularly when those experts become so entrenched in their positions that they lose touch with the broader public. This reflects one of the central critiques of Plato's ideal, the idea that a select group of rulers, however well-intentioned, might not be able to truly understand or represent the complexities of society. If governance requires wisdom, then what happens when wisdom becomes divorced from the lived experiences of the people it is meant to serve? The philosopher-king may remain a compelling vision, but the question of who should rule and on what basis remains an enduring challenge. Plato's disdain for democracy was rooted in his deep-seated belief that the masses were inherently unqualified to make decisions about governance. This view emerged from his first-hand experiences in Athens, particularly the execution of his mentor, Socrates, at the hands of a democratic system. Socrates, a philosopher who sought to challenge conventional thinking and question the status quo, was sentenced to death by a jury of his fellow citizens. For Plato, this event symbolized the fatal flaw of democracy, its tendency to elevate emotions, ignorance, and public opinion above reason, wisdom, and justice. In a system where every citizen had an equal say in the political process, even those who lacked the necessary knowledge to make informed decisions could shape the future of the state. This, Plato argued, was a recipe for disaster. The result, he believed, was that democracy allowed demagogues, charismatic leaders who appealed to the desires and fears of the masses, to rise to power, often leading the state into chaos and ruin. One of Plato's central critiques of democracy was its tendency to be swayed by the passions and whims of the people, rather than guided by rational thought and reasoned debate. In a democracy, leaders must pander to popular opinion to secure votes, often sacrificing wisdom, justice, and long-term vision in favor of short-term gains. Plato feared that this constant need for popularity would lead to a system where the most persuasive speakers, rather than the most competent or virtuous individuals, would be the ones to govern. This fear was not unfounded. Throughout history, we have seen the rise of populist leaders who, despite their lack of expertise or moral integrity, were able to sway public opinion and gain political power. For Plato, the danger of democracy lay not in its ideals, but in its execution. The masses, in his view, were driven by their immediate desires, and thus they could be easily manipulated by demagogues who promised to fulfill those desires, even at the cost of the state's long-term stability. Plato's criticisms of democracy, while harsh, are not entirely unfounded. In the modern era, we can observe similar dangers in contemporary democratic systems, where political leaders often prioritize short-term electoral gains over long-term policy solutions. Political campaigns frequently focus on emotional appeals, rather than rational arguments, and promises of immediate rewards rather than careful consideration of the future consequences of policy decisions. This pattern is especially evident during times of crisis, when fear and uncertainty can prompt citizens to place their trust in leaders who promise quick solutions. In such an environment, it becomes easy for politicians to exploit public emotions for their own gain, much like the demagogues Plato warned about. Despite these flaws, democracy also offers mechanisms of accountability that can help prevent the worst excesses of populism. Checks and balances, transparency, and a free press are just some of the ways in which modern democracies attempt to counterbalance the influence of populist leaders and ensure that the voice of the people does not devolve into mere emotional reaction. However, despite the safeguards in place in modern democracies, Plato's concerns about the potential dangers of democracy remain strikingly relevant today. He argued that when the majority is allowed to dictate the direction of the state, the result is often the triumph of mediocrity over excellence. In his view, the majority lacked the intellectual capacity to understand the true nature of justice, or the complexities of governance. Democracy, for Plato, was a system that rewarded those who could best manipulate public opinion, rather than those who had the knowledge and wisdom to lead effectively. This, he believed, was why democracy so often descended into chaos, paving the way for authoritarian regimes. While modern democracies have evolved significantly since Plato's time, the basic challenge he identified remains. How can we ensure that democracy does not succumb to the will of the unqualified masses? And how can we ensure that those in power remain accountable to the people while also making informed, rational decisions? Plato's warning about democracy, though written over 2 millennia ago, still carries weight in contemporary political discourse. In contrast to his rejection of democracy, Plato's preference for rule by the wise, through philosopher-kings, presents a starkly different vision of governance. However, his argument raises critical questions about the practicalities of such a system. While the idea of philosopher-kings is compelling, it's also deeply problematic. Could a government run by intellectual elites ever avoid becoming a detached, elitist system that excludes the majority from meaningful participation? Would philosopher-kings always act in the best interests of the people, Or could their intellectual arrogance lead them to become blind to the real needs of the masses? These questions underscore the difficulties inherent in Plato's vision of governance, revealing the complex balance between intellectual expertise, democratic participation, and the need for leaders who are both wise and empathetic. Plato's criticism of democracy, though provocative, serves as a reminder of the need for vigilance in any system of governance, urging us to consider both the strengths and the limitations of democratic rule. In the age of advanced technology, specialization, and vast amounts of data, the concept of technocracy, governance by experts, has become increasingly appealing to some. Technocracy, in essence, is the idea that the most qualified individuals, those with technical or intellectual expertise, should rule society. In theory, this approach seems to offer an elegant solution to the challenges posed by democracy, where decisions are often made by individuals without the necessary knowledge or expertise in complex fields. In a technocratic system, leaders would be chosen based on their proficiency in specific disciplines, ensuring that decisions are grounded in facts, science, and data. This would, ideally, eliminate the influence of populism, charisma, or emotional appeal, focusing instead on the rational management of society. However, while the appeal of technocracy is clear, there are significant dangers to such a system, as Plato himself warned about in his critique of rule by the wise. One of the most glaring risks of a technocracy is the potential for detachment between the ruling elite and the general populace. In Plato's view, expertise in governance is not just about possessing knowledge, it is also about understanding the human experience, engaging with the needs and desires of the people, and considering the ethical implications of decisions. Technocrats, by their very nature, are often deeply specialized in narrow fields, and while their technical knowledge may be vast, their understanding of human emotions, desires, and broader social dynamics can be limited. In a society governed by technocrats, it is easy to imagine a situation where decisions are made from an abstract, intellectual standpoint that fails to account for the real-life struggles and experiences of everyday citizens. This disconnect could breed discontent and alienation among the public, who might feel that their voices and concerns are overlooked in favor of cold, impersonal data and statistics. Furthermore, a technocratic system risks becoming an oligarchy of intellectual elites, where power is concentrated in the hands of a few individuals or institutions that are perceived to be the only ones qualified to make decisions. This could undermine democratic principles of equality and representation, as it would effectively exclude large segments of the population from meaningful participation in political decision-making. Although technocrats may argue that their expertise enables them to make better decisions, the reality is that no one, regardless of their expertise, can fully grasp the complexities of society as a whole. Society is inherently diverse, and decisions must consider a wide array of perspectives, values, and needs. When decisions are made by a small group of experts, there is a significant risk that the interests of the broader population, especially marginalized or underrepresented groups, are ignored or sidelined. Plato's criticism of governance by a small elite resonates strongly here, as a technocratic system could easily slide into a form of authoritarianism, where power is wielded by those who hold specialized knowledge, without adequate checks and balances. Historically, technocracies have been tried in various forms, and they have not always been successful. The most notable example is the early 20th century movement in the United States, when technocrats advocated for a government run by engineers, economists, and other specialists. The idea was that by applying scientific principles to governance, society could be managed more efficiently, eliminating the inefficiencies and corruption that often plague political systems. However, the movement ultimately faltered, as critics pointed out the lack of accountability and the potential for elitism. While technocrats may have the expertise to address specific issues, they often lack the political and social acumen needed to understand the broader implications of their decisions. This gap in understanding can lead to solutions that are technically sound, but socially or politically untenable. Additionally, when technocratic leaders are unaccountable to the public, their policies can become authoritarian, as they are not subjected to the same scrutiny as elected officials in a democratic system. Another concern with technocracy is its potential to prioritize efficiency over equity. Technocratic solutions often aim to streamline processes and maximize output, but in doing so, they can overlook issues of fairness, justice, and social equity. For instance, economic policies driven solely by technical expertise may favor wealthy or corporate interests, while neglecting the needs of the disadvantaged. Technocrats may also prioritize technological advancement or economic growth without considering the broader social and ethical consequences of their actions. This could lead to policies that, while efficient, exacerbate inequality and create new forms of social division. Plato, in his critique of rule by experts, recognized that expertise in governance requires more than just knowledge. It requires moral wisdom and an understanding of justice. Without these qualities, even the most skilled technocrats could make decisions that harm society as a whole. In the modern world, as technology continues to advance and specialists become more integral to the functioning of society, the temptation to move towards technocratic forms of governance is likely to increase. However, the lessons from Plato's critique of Sophocracy and Technocracy should serve as a warning. While experts may be indispensable in guiding complex systems, governance requires more than just technical proficiency. It requires a balance of knowledge, wisdom, and moral integrity, as well as an ongoing dialogue between leaders and the people they serve. Technocracy, if taken too far, risks creating a society in which decision-making is divorced from the lived experiences of ordinary citizens, potentially leading to a disconnected, elitist system. Ultimately, the challenge remains: how can we integrate expertise into governance without sacrificing democracy, accountability, and social equity? Plato's vision of philosopher-kings may have been idealistic, but it raises a crucial point. The wisdom of governance is not solely about technical knowledge. It is about understanding the complexities of human society and the ethical responsibilities that come with power. The distinction between intelligence and wisdom has been a central theme in philosophical discourse for centuries, and it plays a crucial role in the debate about the qualities that make a good leader. Plato, in his works, repeatedly emphasizes the importance of wisdom over mere intelligence, particularly when it comes to governance. Intelligence, in the conventional sense, refers to the ability to think critically, solve complex problems, and process information quickly. It is often associated with intellectual prowess, quick learning, and the capacity to understand abstract concepts. Wisdom, on the other hand, involves a deeper understanding of life, human nature, and the consequences of one's actions. It is not just about having knowledge, but knowing how to apply it in a way that is thoughtful, compassionate, and just. Wisdom is inherently more practical and moral, grounded in experience and ethical judgment. Plato believed that true leaders must embody both intelligence and wisdom, but he warned that intelligence alone is insufficient when it comes to ruling justly. The problem with relying solely on intelligence in leadership is that it can often lead to arrogance and a lack of empathy. Intelligent leaders may be adept at crafting solutions to problems, but without wisdom, they may fail to consider the broader consequences of their actions. For instance, a brilliant economist might propose a policy that boosts economic growth, but overlooks the social inequalities it exacerbates. In such cases, the leader's intelligence could lead to decisions that are technically sound but morally or socially damaging. This highlights one of the key flaws of relying on intelligence as the sole criterion for leadership. It can be divorced from the human context in which decisions are made. Intelligence, if not tempered by wisdom, may prioritize efficiency, logic, and self-interest over the well-being of the broader community. Plato recognized this danger, suggesting that leaders must possess not only the ability to understand complex ideas, but also the moral discernment to apply that understanding in a way that benefits society as a whole. Moreover, history has shown us that some of the most intelligent individuals, while capable of extraordinary feats in their respective fields, have proven to be disastrous leaders. One of the most striking examples is the figure of Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was undeniably brilliant, a military strategist and political leader whose intelligence allowed him to rise from obscurity to become the ruler of much of Europe. However, his over-reliance on his own intellect and his refusal to heed the advice of others ultimately led to his downfall. His arrogance and lack of wisdom in dealing with the realities of war and diplomacy led to decisions that caused immense suffering, and the loss of countless lives. This example serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of intelligence without wisdom in leadership. It is not enough to be smart. Leaders must also have the foresight, humility, and moral clarity that come with wisdom. The distinction between intelligence and wisdom becomes particularly important when we consider the role of leaders in a democracy or any form of government. While an intelligent leader may be capable of analyzing data and making quick decisions, the complexity of governance requires a deeper, more reflective approach. Wisdom involves considering the long-term implications of policies, balancing the needs of different groups, and making decisions that align with broader ethical principles. In contrast, intelligence often focuses on immediate results and tangible outcomes, which can sometimes lead to short-term solutions that overlook deeper systemic problems. A wise leader, on the other hand, is more likely to weigh all perspectives, consider the needs of the less privileged, and prioritize the long-term health and stability of society over momentary victories. In this sense, wisdom is the more enduring quality that sustains effective leadership. At the same time, the question remains, is wisdom alone enough? Can wisdom be taught, or is it something that can only be gained through experience? While Plato believed that wisdom could be cultivated through rigorous philosophical training and moral education, others argue that wisdom is a product of life experience. The wisdom gained through years of navigating complex human relationships, understanding diverse perspectives, and grappling with the uncertainties of life cannot be easily replicated in a classroom or through intellectual exercises alone. Leaders who have lived through adversity, made difficult moral choices, and reflected on their experiences may possess a depth of wisdom that cannot be matched by even the most intelligent of scholars. This insight into the human condition, combined with the ability to empathize with others, is what often distinguishes the greatest leaders from those who are merely intellectually gifted. In modern society, we frequently find ourselves grappling with the question of whether intelligence or wisdom is the more crucial trait for leadership. Political leaders, CEOs, and other figures of authority are often lauded for their intellectual achievements, yet we also see examples of highly intelligent individuals who struggle to govern effectively. On the other hand, we have leaders whose wisdom, whether derived from experience or a deep moral sense, allows them to make difficult but just decisions that resonate with the public. The question of whether intelligence is sufficient for good leadership remains an open one, but it is clear that without wisdom, intelligence alone is unlikely to produce effective, compassionate, or sustainable leadership. For Plato, the ideal leader would combine both intelligence and wisdom, ensuring that decisions are not only rational, but also just and humane. This synthesis of intellect and virtue is what Plato believed was necessary for a truly just society, one where rulers govern not out of self-interest or mere intellectual competence, but out of a deep understanding of what is good for the whole community. The notion of a modern Sophocracy, where governance is led by the wisest individuals rather than the most popular or elected, raises a compelling question about the future of political systems in today's complex, information-driven world. In ancient times, Plato envisioned a society ruled by philosopher-kings, individuals who possessed both intellectual brilliance and deep moral wisdom, guided by a profound understanding of justice. While this concept was idealistic, it touched upon a very real concern: the limitations of mass democracy, particularly in societies where political decisions are often driven by short-term interests, populism, and media manipulation. In modern times, the question of whether a Sophocracy could function is particularly pertinent in an age dominated by specialization, technology, and growing dissatisfaction with traditional democratic systems. Could a system based on meritocracy and wisdom truly work in a modern society, or would it inevitably devolve into elitism and authoritarianism? One of the first challenges in establishing a modern Sophocracy is defining who qualifies as wise enough to govern. Plato's ideal rulers were not simply intellectuals, but individuals who had undergone extensive education in philosophy and had gained wisdom through years of personal development, reflection, and experience. In today's world, however, the concept of wisdom is multifaceted and subjective. The sheer diversity of human experience and cultural values makes it difficult, if not impossible, to determine who is best qualified to rule. Wisdom is not simply an intellectual pursuit. It involves empathy, moral clarity, an understanding of social dynamics, and a deep connection to the lives of ordinary people. In modern society, how can we determine who truly possesses these qualities? Moreover, as societies become increasingly globalized, the criteria for wisdom would need to account for a broad spectrum of values, perspectives, and societal needs, complicating the task of selecting the right individuals to govern. In many ways, the concept of a modern Sophocracy could be seen as a hybrid of democracy and meritocracy. In theory, a meritocratic system would allow the most qualified individuals to rise to positions of power, ensuring that leaders have the necessary expertise to tackle the challenges of modern governance. This would, in turn, address some of the criticisms that Plato had of democracy. The idea that the majority is often swayed by emotions, ignorance, or the persuasive rhetoric of demagogues. A modern Sophocracy would look to select leaders based on their intellect, ethical reasoning, and practical understanding of how society functions, rather than their ability to win popular votes or appeal to the masses. However, the problem lies in the inherent tension between meritocracy and democracy. While the idea of a merit-based system seems logical, it raises questions about representation and equality. In a meritocracy, it is easy to imagine that only those from elite backgrounds, those with access to the best education and resources, would have the opportunity to prove themselves wise enough to govern. This would create a political system that could alienate large portions of the population, particularly marginalized groups that are often excluded from traditional educational systems or access to positions of power. Another challenge in implementing a modern Sophocracy would be the risk of concentrated power in the hands of a small intellectual elite. Plato feared that a system ruled by philosopher-kings could easily become an oligarchy, where a select few held power and made decisions that served their own interests rather than the common good. This concern remains relevant in today's world, where the concentration of power among technocrats, business elites, and intellectuals has created growing inequalities and widespread disillusionment with political systems. The idea of a Sophocracy, while appealing in theory, risks creating a technocratic or aristocratic class that governs based on their own specialized knowledge without sufficient input or accountability from the general populace. In such a system, there is a real danger of detachment from the needs and desires of ordinary citizens, leading to policies that are well-intentioned but fail to address the broader social realities. One significant obstacle to a modern Sophocracy would be ensuring that the wisdom of leaders is balanced by democratic accountability. In Plato's ideal state, philosopher-kings would be guided by wisdom and virtue, but in reality, it is difficult to guarantee that any group of intellectuals, no matter how well-trained or well-meaning, can avoid the pitfalls of corruption or authoritarianism. A system without checks and balances, where power is concentrated in the hands of a few wise individuals, could quickly evolve into a dictatorship of elites. The challenge, then, is how to design a system in which intellectual merit is rewarded while still maintaining the essential democratic values of participation, accountability, and equality. Some might argue that a hybrid system, combining aspects of democracy with the guidance of specialized knowledge, could provide a potential solution. For example, political leaders could be chosen based on their merit and expertise in specific areas, but their decisions would still be subject to the oversight of the public through democratic institutions like referenda, citizen advisory boards, or open debates. This model could provide the best of both worlds, wisdom in governance without the dangers of elite detachment or authoritarianism. Ultimately, the question of whether a modern Sophocracy could function is a deeply philosophical one, highlighting the tension between intellectual expertise and democratic participation. Plato's vision of philosopher-kings was an ideal, and one that in practice faces insurmountable challenges in the context of a modern, pluralistic society. While there is undoubtedly merit in selecting leaders who possess wisdom and expertise, there is also the inescapable reality that no single group of people can possess all the answers to the complex and ever-changing problems of society. The wisdom of governance must be tempered with humility, recognizing that expertise, while essential, cannot replace the lived experiences and diverse perspectives of the people. A modern Sophocracy could exist, but it would require careful consideration of how to integrate merit, democracy, and accountability in a way that ensures a just and balanced society. It is a vision worth exploring, but one that requires constant reflection on its ethical implications and practical limitations. Plato's vision of governance, particularly his advocacy for philosopher-kings and a society ruled by the wisest individuals, has been met with significant criticism throughout history. While his ideas laid the foundation for much of Western political thought, modern thinkers have questioned whether his idealistic vision can truly function in the real world. Plato's system, rooted in a deeply hierarchical structure, assumes that only a select few can possess the wisdom and virtue necessary to govern justly, and it excludes large swathes of the population from political participation. This notion of a society led by intellectual elites has generated debates around the feasibility of such a system and its potential dangers. Today, critiques of Plato's ideas revolve around concerns of inequality, the concentration of power, the exclusion of diverse perspectives, and the inherent flaws of any system that assumes a monopoly on wisdom. By examining these criticisms, we can gain a better understanding of why Plato's vision, despite its intellectual appeal, might be flawed in contemporary contexts. One of the primary criticisms of Plato's ideal society is its exclusionary nature. In Plato's Republic, the ruling class, the philosopher-kings, are chosen from an early age based on their intellectual ability, moral virtue, and potential to lead. Those who do not meet these stringent criteria are relegated to lower positions in society, either as warriors or laborers. This division creates a rigid, class-based society where political power is concentrated in the hands of a small elite. While Plato's intention was to ensure that the wisest individuals rule, the reality is that such a system runs the risk of perpetuating inequality and social division. Plato's hierarchical approach overlooks the contributions that diverse groups of people can offer, reducing them to mere instruments for the functioning of society. In modern democratic societies, the idea that power should be concentrated in the hands of a small, intellectually superior group seems fundamentally unjust, as it denies individuals the right to participate in shaping their own political destiny. The concept of governance as an exclusive right of the best individuals does not account for the rich diversity of human experiences and perspectives, nor does it address the inherent value of inclusivity and democratic representation. Moreover, Plato's focus on intellectual merit as the sole criterion for leadership is problematic because it fails to recognize that wisdom is not confined to intellectual ability alone. Wisdom is often derived from life experience, emotional intelligence, and an understanding of the human condition, qualities that are not always correlated with intellectual aptitude. The idea that only philosophers or individuals with specialized knowledge can lead effectively neglects the practical, everyday knowledge that is often the most important for navigating complex social and political issues. For instance, the challenges faced by everyday citizens, such as poverty, social justice, and human rights, require not only intellectual problem-solving, but also empathy, compassion, and an understanding of diverse cultural and social contexts. A system that values intellectual merit over lived experience may overlook the voices of those who have first-hand knowledge of these issues, which could lead to policies that are disconnected from the realities of the people they are meant to serve. Another criticism of Plato's vision is the inherent danger of concentrating too much power in the hands of a small group of intellectual elites. Plato envisioned a society governed by philosopher-kings, but this concentration of power could easily result in tyranny. Plato acknowledged that philosopher-kings would need to be morally virtuous and committed to justice, but he also recognized that such individuals would be rare and that power could corrupt even the wisest rulers. The assumption that philosopher-kings would remain immune to corruption is naive, as history has shown time and again that power tends to corrupt those who wield it, regardless of their initial intentions. The concentration of power in an elite ruling class poses a significant risk of authoritarianism, where decisions are made without checks and balances, and the voices of the majority are silenced. Plato's model assumes that the philosopher-kings would always act in the best interests of society, but there is no guarantee that they would be immune to personal bias, ambition, or the desire for control. This undemocratic concentration of power undermines the very principles of equality, fairness, and representation that are central to modern political systems. Furthermore, Plato's idea of the philosopher-king assumes a certain universality of wisdom and morality that is difficult to achieve. What is considered wise or just in one culture or society may not be viewed the same way in another. The idea of an objective, universal moral standard is problematic, as it assumes that all societies share the same values and ideals. In reality, different cultures have different conceptions of justice, freedom, and the role of government, which complicates the idea of a single unifying system of wisdom that can be applied universally. The assumption that a small group of philosopher-kings can possess a comprehensive understanding of all aspects of human life, both intellectual and moral, is overly simplistic. Wisdom is subjective and varies according to context, making it impossible for any one group to fully grasp the complexity of human society and governance. Thus, Plato's idea of philosopher-kings could easily become a form of intellectual imperialism, where a small, elitist class imposes its own narrow worldview on the rest of society. In addition to these theoretical flaws, there are practical challenges to implementing Plato's system in the modern world. The centralization of power in the hands of a few wise rulers would likely be at odds with the democratic ideals that have become central to modern political thought. In democracies, the idea is that all citizens, regardless of their intelligence or social status, have an equal right to participate in the political process and shape the direction of society. Plato's system, however, effectively denies this right to the majority of people, relegating them to passive roles in society. While it is true that democracy can sometimes lead to ill-informed decision-making, the alternative, a system where only a select few rule, presents its own set of dangers. The legitimacy of a political system depends on the active participation and consent of the governed, and a system that excludes the majority from meaningful political involvement risks losing that legitimacy. Ultimately, while Plato's vision of philosopher-kings and a society governed by the wisest individuals has its intellectual appeal, it fails to account for the complexities and imperfections of human nature. The assumption that wisdom can be objectively defined and that a small group of elites can govern in the best interests of society overlooks the need for inclusivity, representation, and the practical realities of governance. While Plato's work provides valuable insights into the nature of justice, power, and governance, it also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of an overly centralized, elitist political system. In today's world, where democracy, equality, and diversity are central values, Plato's vision might be seen as both idealistic and flawed, offering a glimpse of an idealized past, but falling short of addressing the diverse needs and voices of modern societies. As we move further into the 21st century, the political landscape across the globe is undergoing significant transformation. Populist movements, widespread disillusionment with established democratic institutions, and the rise of authoritarian figures have made many question the effectiveness and sustainability of contemporary democratic systems. At the same time, the increasing influence of technology, social media, and the growing gap between political elites and ordinary citizens have fueled a sense of uncertainty about the future of governance. In this environment, the question arises: are modern societies closer to a sophisticated form of governance akin to Plato's idea of a Sophocracy, or are we heading toward a more chaotic and fragmented political future? Could the ideals of wisdom-based leadership and meritocracy be achieved, or have we drifted too far from Plato's vision into a world where democracy and chaos coexist in an increasingly unstable global order? To begin answering this question, it is essential to examine the political systems of today in light of Plato's theory. In some respects, modern societies may seem closer to a Sophocracy than ever before. The rise of technocratic governance, where specialists and experts dominate, decision-making in key areas such as economics, technology, and environmental policy, echoes Plato's idea of rule by the wise. Technocracies, at least in theory, prioritize the leadership of those with the necessary knowledge and expertise to solve complex problems, whether in government, corporations, or international organizations. Countries like Singapore have implemented systems where experts, rather than elected politicians, often hold key positions of power, with a focus on efficiency, pragmatism, and evidence-based policy decisions. In this regard, we see an attempt to achieve a form of governance that resembles Plato's ideal, where those who govern are selected based on their intellectual abilities, technical expertise, and moral vision. However, while technocracies may bring about highly effective solutions, in specific fields they also come with significant risks. The concentration of power in the hands of a small elite of experts can distance political decision-making from the needs and values of the general population, leading to policies that may not adequately reflect the desires of the people. This problem, which Plato anticipated, raises the question: is wisdom enough to ensure just governance, or does it require democratic oversight and accountability? On the other hand, the increasing polarization and instability in many democratic systems could also suggest that we are heading toward a more chaotic and fragmented political future. From the rise of populist leaders who challenge established norms to the erosion of trust in traditional political institutions, we are witnessing a shift away from the ideal of informed, rational decision-making. Social media and the internet have amplified misinformation and tribalism, with political leaders often relying on emotional appeals and divisive rhetoric to gain support, rather than reasoned arguments or ethical considerations. This mirrors Plato's critique of democracy, in which he argued that the masses, driven by passions and manipulated by demagogues, were ill-equipped to make wise decisions. Today, many democratic systems are grappling with the consequences of a lack of informed political discourse, as well as the growing influence of powerful media outlets that prioritize sensationalism over reason. The result is a fragmentation of society into echo chambers where citizens are increasingly isolated from diverse perspectives, unable or unwilling to engage in meaningful dialogue across political divides. This dynamic has led some to question whether democracy itself is in crisis and whether the current system is sustainable in the face of rising populism and authoritarianism. Despite these challenges, it is also possible to argue that we are not necessarily heading toward chaos, but rather a new form of governance that may incorporate both elements of Plato's Sophocracy and democratic ideals. One of the key lessons from Plato's philosophy is the importance of education in the development of wise leaders. Plato believed that individuals should be educated in philosophy, mathematics, and the arts in order to cultivate their intellectual and moral capacities. Today, the idea of education as a central pillar of leadership remains crucial, albeit in a more modernized form. If we are to avoid the chaos of uninformed decision-making and populist manipulation, it is essential that citizens are equipped with the knowledge, critical thinking skills, and ethical understanding necessary to make informed choices about their leaders. This would require a broad-based educational reform that focuses not only on academic achievement, but also on cultivating virtues such as empathy, responsibility, and the ability to engage with diverse perspectives. The rise of the internet and online learning has opened up new possibilities for democratic participation in education, potentially enabling individuals to become more informed and engaged in political matters. In this way, modern societies may be able to bridge the gap between the intellectual elitism of a Sophocracy and the inclusiveness of democracy, creating a system that values both wisdom and popular participation. However, this vision of a future, where democracy and wisdom-based governance coexist, is not without its challenges. One of the most significant obstacles to achieving this balance is the growing distrust between citizens and political elites. The widening gap between the political class and ordinary citizens has created a climate of alienation and resentment, where many people feel disconnected from the decisions that affect their lives. This sense of disillusionment has fueled populist movements, which promise to give power back to the people by bypassing traditional political institutions and leaders. While some of these movements have genuine concerns about inequality and the erosion of democratic values, others have been co-opted by demagogues who prey on people's fears and frustrations. This dynamic presents a stark contrast to Plato's ideal of philosopher-kings who would rule with reason and virtue. In reality, many political leaders today seem to prioritize power, short-term gains, and self-interest over the long-term well-being of society. The challenge, therefore, is how to rebuild trust in democratic institutions and ensure that political leaders, whether they are experts or elected officials, remain accountable to the people they serve. In conclusion, the question of whether modern society is closer to a Sophocracy or chaos is not a binary one. In many ways, we are witnessing a convergence of both trends. The rise of technocracy and expert-driven governance suggests that we are moving closer to Plato's ideal of rule by the wise, while the growing polarization, populism, and erosion of trust in democratic institutions point toward a future that Plato might have seen as chaotic. The challenge, then, is how to navigate these competing forces and create a political system that values both intellectual expertise and democratic participation. This might mean embracing a hybrid system, one that incorporates the wisdom of experts and the broad-based engagement of the people, while ensuring that no single group holds disproportionate power. In the end, the lesson from Plato's philosophy is clear. Wisdom, education, and virtue are essential to governance, but they must be balanced with the values of equality, inclusivity, and democratic accountability. The future of political systems, then, may lie in finding a way to combine these ideals in a way that can withstand the challenges of the modern world. As we reflect on Plato's ideal vision of governance, a key question emerges. Can we reconcile his vision of a society governed by philosopher-kings with the values of modern democracy? Plato's theory, with its focus on the rule of the wise, was rooted in a belief that a small group of enlightened individuals could better serve the collective good. However, in today's world, where democracy, equality, and participatory governance are central to political systems, finding a way to merge these two ideals, intellectual meritocracy and democratic inclusivity, presents a unique challenge. The future of governance may hinge on how societies can balance the pursuit of wisdom and leadership with the values of democracy, ensuring that the best aspects of both systems are preserved and cultivated. This topic delves into how we might adapt Plato's ideas for modern times, how political systems could evolve to incorporate wisdom while retaining democratic principles, and the potential paths we could take to achieve a more just, informed, and inclusive society. One possible direction is the continued development of meritocracy within democratic frameworks. While Plato's version of meritocracy was exclusive, with power concentrated in the hands of intellectual elites, modern meritocracies can be more inclusive. In the contemporary world, meritocracy is often linked to the idea that individuals can rise to positions of power based on their abilities, skills, and education, rather than their social class or inheritance. In theory, meritocratic systems allow for a more dynamic, fairer selection of leaders. However, the practical implementation of a meritocratic system that remains truly inclusive is fraught with challenges. In modern societies, wealth, access to education, and social privileges often skew the playing field, preventing people from all backgrounds from achieving their full potential. While modern democracies emphasize the importance of equal rights and opportunities, true meritocracy often falters when access to education and political power is limited to a select few. For Plato's vision to be applied effectively in today's world, it would require a concerted effort to level the playing field, ensuring that the individuals who rise to positions of leadership are not only the most talented and intelligent, but also those who reflect a diverse range of experiences and backgrounds. It's not enough to simply reward intellectual prowess. Leadership must also be rooted in an understanding of social justice, equity, and the needs of the broader population. Furthermore, any attempt to integrate Plato's ideals into modern democracy must address the challenges posed by technology and globalization. Plato lived in a world that was fundamentally different from ours, where the scope of governance and the flow of information were relatively limited. In today's interconnected world, political leaders are expected to navigate complex global issues, from climate change to economic inequality to international diplomacy. The rise of digital technology has revolutionized communication, allowing information to flow instantaneously across borders and creating a more informed and active global citizenry. However, this technological revolution has also given rise to new challenges in governance, including the spread of misinformation, the manipulation of public opinion through social media, and the increasing influence of corporate interests over political decision-making. To successfully incorporate Plato's emphasis on wise leadership into modern governance, we must grapple with these technological and global forces, ensuring that leaders have not only intellectual and moral wisdom, but also the ability to navigate these new challenges with integrity and accountability. Additionally, a successful integration of Plato's ideas into modern governance would require a radical rethinking of the education system. Plato believed that the philosopher-king must undergo rigorous education and training in philosophy, mathematics, and ethics to cultivate both intellect and virtue. Today, the notion of educating leaders to make informed and virtuous decisions remains relevant, but the scope of this education must be expanded beyond the intellectual to include emotional intelligence, empathy, and an understanding of diverse cultural and social contexts. In modern times, leaders must not only be skilled in politics and economics, but also in understanding the complex needs and aspirations of the people they serve. This means that education for future leaders must focus on cultivating a deep understanding of social issues, historical contexts, and global dynamics, alongside the traditional focus on intellectual achievement. Furthermore, this education must be accessible to a wide range of individuals, ensuring that a diverse array of voices and perspectives are included in the pool of potential leaders. In this way, the intellectual merit that Plato emphasized could be balanced with a more inclusive and holistic approach to leadership development, where wisdom is not limited to intellectual ability, but encompasses a broader understanding of humanity and society. However, integrating Plato's philosophy with modern democratic values is not without its risks. One of the dangers of attempting to implement a version of Sophocracy, even a modernized version, is that it could lead to the emergence of an elitist, technocratic class that is disconnected from the lived experiences of ordinary citizens. While Plato's philosopher-kings were meant to rule with wisdom and justice, there is a real risk that such a system could devolve into a form of elitism that ignores the voices of the majority. For Plato's system to work in modern times, it would require safeguards against the concentration of power in the hands of a few, as well as mechanisms for ensuring that leaders remain accountable to the people. This would likely require greater emphasis on participatory governance, where citizens are more actively involved in the decision-making process, even if they are not part of the intellectual elite. It would also require transparency and accountability in all levels of government, ensuring that leaders cannot act in their own self-interest without oversight from the public. Without such checks, there is a real danger that the wisdom of the philosopher-kings could become a justification for authoritarian rule, where the elites impose their vision of the good on the rest of society without regard for the will of the people. Finally, the most significant challenge in merging Plato's vision of governance with modern democracy is balancing the need for effective leadership with the preservation of individual freedoms and rights. Plato's philosopher-kings, though wise and virtuous, were not democratically chosen, and their authority rested on their intellectual and moral superiority. In contrast, modern democracy is built on the principle that power should be derived from the consent of the governed. In a democratic system, leaders are elected by the people, and their authority is contingent upon their ability to represent and serve the interests of the public. While Plato's emphasis on wisdom and virtue in leadership is undeniably valuable, the modern world places a premium on individual freedoms and participatory decision-making. The challenge, then, is how to preserve the integrity of democratic processes while ensuring that those in power possess the wisdom and moral fortitude necessary to govern justly. It is possible that the future of governance lies in creating a system where democratic ideals and the pursuit of wisdom can coexist, with mechanisms in place to ensure that power is both exercised competently and accountable to the people. Conclusion. Plato's vision of governance remains a powerful and thought-provoking framework for understanding leadership and the role of wisdom in politics. However, in today's world, we must adapt his ideas to fit the realities of modern democracy, ensuring that leadership is not only wise, but also inclusive, accountable, and representative of the diverse needs of the populace. The future of governance may lie in blending the best aspects of Plato's ideal society with the principles of modern democracy, creating a system where wisdom is valued, but the rights and voices of all citizens are also respected. This will require a shift in both political philosophy and practical governance, as well as a renewed commitment to education, equity, and global cooperation. The challenge is daunting, but the potential rewards, a more just, informed, and sustainable society, are worth striving for.